The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. Well, Corbyn, welcome to the journey. This is Corbyn Tyson, and we've been good friends for a little bit here, a few years. I'm trying to even think about how far it goes back.
I would say probably at least 10 years.
If not, maybe even a little bit longer, because I opened up KP in 2001, and you did that Corvette video for me. That was before I opened up the Wellness Center in 2010. Yeah. So
maybe 07, 08.
Yeah. So it goes back a while.
Before the iPhone.
Before the iPhone. Exactly. So, but let me just tell you a little bit about the journey and what we're trying to do here. And basically, the journey is just having individuals come on and just having conversations about individuals who've transformed their lives, who've maybe had some setbacks and then failed forward, different obstacles in their life, and how they learn from those obstacles and how they've been transformed because of that. And so I know some of the conversations we've had in the past, I thought you'd just be a great person to come on and hear some of the things that, some of your thoughts and some of the things that you've done, because I know every time we're together, I learn something from you. So,
well, I don't know about that, but thanks for having me.
No, seriously. All serious. But before we get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and then what do you do for fun? So why don't you start off with what do you do for fun?
Oh, for fun? Well, right now sleep, because I'm just like super busy.
Sure.
I just started a new job in April at an ad agency, so heading up digital strategy and then video production.
Okay.
And then I've got 3 kids.
Sure. Okay.
15, 12, and 9.
Okay.
So I got my hands full.
Okay.
And then I thought it would be smart, dumb to start up some YouTube content. So I'm working on that here and there, and hence the tired voice and the squinty eyes, because I'm burning at both ends right now.
Gotcha. So the content that you're developing for the YouTube, that's a more, you've been doing that for a long time, but this particular project is just probably just less than 2 months old, right?
Yeah. So I actually kind of got started making my own content probably about 5 years ago, and I sold a show to a YouTube channel, which I thought was a really good idea, and it was a documentary about fatherhood, and so that kind of started my journey of making my own content. I've done video production since Macs were beige, since I think 1996 is when I started in the creative industry, and so I'd always been making videos and commercials here locally and nationally, and then I thought, you know what, I've got an idea for a documentary, and so I submitted it to this YouTube called Soul Pancake. They bought it, and then we produced that. It did quite well, and then I kind of shelved things for 5 years, and I finally kind of got off my ass in the last few months and started that back up to start making some stuff on my own again.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little, because I remember that, I remember the Fatherhood Project, and that was, I really enjoyed listening to it, and really enjoyed that whole, as I was looking at the videos and then talking to you during that time period as you were creating. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that was and about that, and where'd that idea come from?
I tend to have lots of weird ideas, and I had this idea that I had actually written it. It was an idea to do a road trip with my dad, and to do a documentary about it, and then interview fathers along the way and see what fathers, like, kind of what advice they would have. What did you do right? What did you do wrong? And so I had written this thing, and then actually a friend of mine sent me a tweet that Rainn Wilson, Dwight Schrute from The Office,
Sure.
he had started this company called Soul Pancake, and they were looking for show ideas. And my friend sent me the tweet and was like, you should apply. And they had an email on there, and so I wrote a treatment for the show, and it was like 6 episodes. And I sent it in, didn't hear back for months, and then I was in New York on a job, and they called me and they're like, hey, we want to green light at least a pilot episode and see how it does, and then we'll go from there, and we'll potentially renew it for 6 episodes.
Okay.
And it kind of snowballed, did quite well, and then we ended up on the Today Show talking about it, and it was a really incredible opportunity that I really didn't take advantage of, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're looking for the underbelly of the story,
Sure.
It was a real interesting process because it was such a personal project. To talk about my dad, to talk about other people's dads. I mean, it was a real raw subject, and then to have 7 or 8 producers telling you how you should tell your story about your dad is a real, it's a mind fuck is the best way to put it.
Sure.
Excuse my French, but and so that was actually like one of these things where it was like I reached the mountaintop. I remember we were walking to the Today Show, and I was like, oh, I did it. I made it. My phone is going to be ringing off the hook. Like I don't have to worry about anything, and I'm like shaking hands with Al Roker and Carson Daly, and I thought I did it, man. I did it.
I've arrived.
Yeah. And little did I know that was like, it actually doesn't matter, and it matters if you're sort of chasing the god of status.
Sure.
Because everybody was like high-fiving me, and it was kind of this thing. But what I didn't realize is that the phone wasn't going to ring. Like I didn't get one call from that. I thought, oh, they're going to just, roll out the red carpet and have piles of money waiting for me to make any documentary I want to, right? Well, it was just like I think they were just, they needed some content. Just like how we are all trying to make content, they needed content, and they just happened to have a TV show. And
it was Father's Day. At that time period, right? So you were featured that particular year. Your project was featured on Father's Day, or right around Father's Day.
Yeah, that week.
That week. So
sponsored by Dove Man Care. That's what it was.
I remember that. Yeah. So when you think back, well, maybe before we get into the part about creating it, but when you think back about the individuals you interviewed, because you got to know their stories. Any one particular story stands out more? Not to say the other ones were less than, but any one particular one stands out, because it's now been a few years since you did that project. Any one of those when you were meeting with them and getting their stories that stood out to you?
I think it was what I learned overall. There wasn't an individual one that was like boom.
Okay.
There was an episode that I interviewed probably about 100 different people.
Okay.
And it was sort of back to back at like a men's conference, and so I was able to get this like fire hose of information of how people were raised.
Right.
And the thing that I took away from that is like, and I tell my friends that have kids all the time, I'm like, they're like, oh, I'm so worried I'm going to be a shitty dad, and then I always say, wait, stop, like, wait, you're worried about it? And they're like, yeah, I just don't. And I was like, you already won. Like, the fact that you're worried about it means that you're way, way ahead of most people, because people, there's a lot of really terrible fathers out there and that don't even give their kids the time of day. And so if you're a dad and you're like, oh man, I'm actually just even a little bit worried, like, you've already won.
Right.
And the second thing that I really took away from that was I for me personally, it was such a step in the right direction of doing my own thing, but also it was like, oh man, like this stuff is not important. The status is not important. Being recognized is not important. What's way more important is that I'm available and present with my kids. And so they actually talked to me about doing a season 2, and during season 1 I was like gone. I mean, I was always filming, a little documentary piece. I was not around for my kids. I was stressed out because of the pressure. And I was like, I don't want to do it, because what I learned from the documentary is that I need to be there for my kids and need to be present. And so it would be sort of a catch, or I don't know, like it wouldn't make sense to learn all this stuff about what it means to be a good dad, and then to just like pursue the things that I learned not to.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things, and again, not to blow smoke up your ass, but that's one of the things I've admired about you is I'm totally not surprised that that's what happened. With that, I've never heard you say it in that way about that. But the thing that I've always saw with you and learned from you is that about being authentic and about being in integrity. So if you're doing a documentary about fatherhood, then a byproduct of that is you're going to be to be challenged to be a better father. I mean, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
And that's what happened. And one of the consequences of that was that you're going to make a decision not to do a second season.
And I also, too, I didn't want to be I wasn't an expert. I was sort of an anti-hero in it, if you will. I was like just observing. And what was happening, though, because I was getting recognition, people were like, you should write a book about fatherhood, and why don't you? I'd be speaking somewhere about it, and like a little old lady would walk up to me and give me her son's phone number and was like, can you call him? He needs to be a better dad. And I was like, well, I'm not like you just trust me, you don't want to call me. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. That was the whole point. It was like, I don't even know. Nobody gave me a manual or anything how to do parenting, and the best way for me to express myself was and to investigate was through a camera. So it was like all these happy accidents, and then suddenly people wanted me to write a dissertation on what it means to be a good father, and I'm like, I don't you don't want to talk to me,
Sure. So when you look back on that now, of course it's years later, and you've made a comment about not capitalizing on it. And if you had to do, what would be one of those things that learning about it, what would you have done different?
Well, I think it was a weird. So this was let's see. It was a weird time in social media, really, too. And I always joke that I didn't capitalize on it because I didn't. My social game sucks, when it comes to social media, and I do marketing for a living, so it's kind of ironic. But had I kind of had things together, I would have had a book. I would have had things ready to go and taken advantage of the opportunity. But I think deep down inside, I didn't really want to. I just wanted to make films. I just wanted to make good stuff, and whatever happened would happen. And I regret, no. It's more of my business hat comes on, and it's like, man, you had an opportunity there, and you just kind of, didn't do much with it. And but in hindsight now, I think it was good, because I think I would have ended up in places I didn't really want to be.
Well, I think that's a great example of, or at least as I'm observing of it, the tension between how do you capitalize on something like that, but then also be authentic, be genuine, right? And you were going after about creating good content because you liked the topic. You wanted to be a better father. You wanted to learn from what your circumstances were with your dad and growing up, and what you were seeing all around you. And so when you're doing that, you don't necessarily have everything rolled out, because then it would look like it was contrived. Right. Now, there are certain times, right, because of maybe other experiences, that you may go into something being a little bit more aware, being a little bit more intentional, and you can have some things already available. Like, having had KP for as long as I have, I almost always have business cards on me.
Right.
But it wasn't like that the first 5 years. I would forget, and I wasn't used to doing that, you know. And now it just becomes part of, so they're available. But it isn't necessarily like I'm set up thinking, I'm going to have to hand out a bunch of business cards.
Right.
It's just, I've just become more aware and more prepared, and it just becomes more just a natural thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's always this weird, back then, there was this weird guilt with it too, because it was like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? From both the showrunners and just the people I'd interact with at that level. There's, when you get to that level, there's this tenacious ambition that I just don't have. I don't really, I'm just not that competitive. And so it was all kind of like, well, I don't even really want that. So, but there's this weird pressure that whatever society or social media puts on you, that if you have success, then you gotta, capitalize on it, write a book, have stickers, have T-shirts, and it's just like, that's just not my nature. And now that I'm, 4 or 5 years have passed, it's like, I'm glad I didn't do that, because I'm just, that's just not who I am at all. And my bank account reflects that.
Yeah. You talked about, when did you get into film? Tell us how did that all happen?
Oh man,
film and making
going way
film.
back.
Yeah.
So I started off as a graphic designer.
Okay.
1996, so like a year out of high school.
Okay.
I started messing around with the computers at my church.
Okay.
And then my little brother was really into computers. He had like a computer repair business, so we always had computers around the house.
Okay.
We had a scanner that was a hand scanner, and it was like this machine. It was like a little bar, and you would take it and you would manually go like this to scan things.
Okay.
And I was like, my brother got it somewhere, I don't know, and he was like, check this out. And I was like, ooh. And then like immediately I started making fake IDs with it.
Sounds good.
Because I was like, ooh, this is great. I could get beer with this, And but then I loved it. I started making flyers for my friends' bands and for the youth group. Okay. Even though I was like using it to like make fake IDs, I still was like helping out at the church.
Sure.
And then I started getting jobs in the summer, working at a print shops.
Okay.
As like the delivery boy, and I would hang out with the designers, and I'd be like, hey, show me how to do this, and what does Photoshop do? Okay. And then I would stay after work because I had access to the computer, because computers back then were $9 million, and you needed a room to run it, right?
Right, yeah.
And a hand crank.
Yeah, little gerbils.
Yeah. And then when I was doing stuff for the church, one of the computers, it was a Mac, and they were beige at the time. It had video inputs, and my brother was starting to play with him and I were messing with like school projects with like 2 VCRs. Okay. So you would, tape on a camcorder to a tape, and then you would edit to another tape. Okay. And that's how you would edit, right? Well, then when we found this computer that had video inputs, we could plug the VCR into the computer and capture the footage to a hard drive and then chop it up, right? Okay. And it was like, and I got obsessed and was a total loser back then to my friends, because I did nothing but that. Okay. Like I wasn't dating anybody. I didn't have a social life. I just buried myself. I was either at Barnes and Noble reading a book about how to do it. Okay. Again, pre the internet. Mm-hmm. And then or I was making stuff, and so I'd set my VCR to MTV, and I'd record like hours, I'd fill the tape with when they used to play music videos. Yep. Yeah. I'd fill that, and then I would just chop those up and make my own stuff. And then I would make like skateboarding videos. Okay. And then it just sort of snowballed, and then a guy was like, hey, do you do TV commercials? And I was like, of course I do, which I didn't. And so I did these furniture store commercials for years, and that's really where I cut my teeth professionally. Okay. And then from there, my buddy Tom that I met worked on movies, and so I would just tag along with him and clean his truck. I was just hungry. I just would do anything I could to learn about it, and then I just kept pursuing it, and I still do it today.
Gotcha. So your initial interest in it was really the technical end.
Yeah, maybe even the criminal end, because I was making fake IDs.
True. That was more entrepreneurial.
There you go, entrepreneurial.
Yeah. So, but it sounded almost like you were more interested or really drawn to the idea that you could create stuff.
Yeah.
And using this modality, and really fascinated by that, and kind of fell in love with that process, and intoxicated by that whole process, and then somewhere along the line. Because the part that I know you was the storyteller, the person that you used film and a camera to tell a story or to create a story. When did you think maybe it was always there, or when did it make that shift where it really became storytelling? And obviously, doing a commercial on a furniture store, it's harder to tell a story.
It is.
They're looking for something different, but I know you've done some phenomenal things for like Swedes, the hospital here in town, and very much I can tell your work is there's a story there. There's a story to that element.
Yeah, I think I've always just been interested in like taking the tangled ball of yarn that is someone's story or even a company's story and sort of untangling it and then snipping here, snipping there, and finding this common thread. I've always been sort of inquisitive about, even when I go to a restaurant, I'm like, what's the story here? What's the scoop here? I was at a whiskey tasting like a month ago, and there was this. We didn't even taste the whiskey, but the lady presenting told the story, and I was like, take my money. I like anything. If this coffee's kind of lame because it's just from Starbucks and it's like a concentrate and whatever, but if there's like a story behind it, it was, the beans were hand-picked from a Peruvian mountaintop. I don't know. I'm in. And I've just been fascinated with story. And then I think as a kid, I was always fascinated with how they made movies happen. I always wanted to figure out, how did they make that happen? And then it just happened to be that I sort of fell in love with documentaries, and I loved documentaries because I was like, I can do that. Like I don't need to move to LA to make that. Right. And it was like, oh wow. And so I immersed myself in documentary, and that's where I went to school for documentary filmmaking, was just immersing myself into it because I didn't go to college for it. Right. And that's where I fell in love with story. And then I noticed from a career standpoint, anybody can take a camera and make a video, right? But can someone tell a story? Right. And so in some ways, then I became a student of journalism. How do you ask questions? How do you pull the right question from somebody and get them to say what you want them to say without them knowing it? And then that's where the authenticity comes across. And I do that whether it's for a documentary about fatherhood, or I was in Atlanta last week doing that, interviewing a food scientist about, ingredients that go into tea. And asking questions. About that stuff too. Sure.
Well, it goes back to when you talked about being at that whiskey tasting, is that you're genuinely curious, and I would think that'd be pretty essential to be asking those questions, trying to capture that, because people love to, if they're into something, whatever they're into. If someone's asking me about the story of why I'm into it, it's going to go to a whole nother level of me talking. It's going to be more than just hitting play, right?
It is, and I've almost had to fall in love with the story, because if corporate videos just will suck your soul and make you question your existence every time you do it, it's pretty boring. And I'm super creative, and it's in me, and it's got to get out. And so I was like, well, I got to figure out how to enjoy this, or this is gonna be a long career of hating it. And so every time I sit down with a CEO or a food scientist or whatever, I'm like, okay, what interesting thing can I learn from this person? And so I sort of play a little bit of a game with it. And then I love too, like with the CEO, it's like, okay, I'm going to get this guy to relax and actually talk to me, and last week I was in Atlanta, and this like super successful CEO comes in, and he's like, I don't want to do this. And I had been interviewing his staff, and I turned to the guy I work with, and I was like, I'm going to get this guy to cry. Just being funny.
Yeah.
And so I started talking about his employees and I meant it, and the next thing you know, this guy's just like pouring his heart out, and we get this amazing story about why, he started this company and why it was such a great family atmosphere. And it's like, oh man, I love that stuff. Sure. When I can take what is really ordinary and make it extraordinary. I love doing that.
Yeah. Which I know that I had been introduced to this concept before you and I met, but when you and I started spending time talking and creating, looking at ways of creating content together and doing different things, we revisited the concept, The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about when you've done your own exploring of that concept, and how does that play into when you've done your own personal work on your own self, but then also in the process of either making content or interviewing someone. Let's talk a little bit about that. How does that play out?
So the hero's journey is Joseph Campbell, and when I came across his philosophy, I was like, because it's like his whole concept of the hero's journey is every single movie ever. Yep. I mean, it is the reason Star Wars exists. Yep. George Lucas is like, I basically stole Star Wars from Joseph Campbell. Right. Yeah. And so when I heard that, I was like, whoa. Yeah. And I came across that documentary, Finding Joe. Yeah. And it was just sort of, then I went down the rabbit hole of figuring that out, and it articulates everything that I have ever experienced, and it also is closely related to what I do, And so any time I'm making any sort of film, there's this arc of conflict resolution, and then maybe even back to conflict. And so that whole philosophy has been huge in my life. When we did the Fatherhood Project, it was like that was a hero's journey. Yeah. And then the time in between that was a hero's journey, and the time right now is the hero's journey. It's always like, where am I at? Right. On that circle. On that circle. Yeah. It helps in so many different ways that it's the thing I give people the most, that documentary. Like, I have a Dropbox link for it now, and I just send it to people because I love it. Right. So much, because it articulates every single one of our struggles, our victories, and then even I think it articulates the waiting and like that time in between adventures. Right. It articulates, and I think that is just as important as the adventure, is that time in between the adventures, that limbo. Right. I could write a book on that. Right.
I'd come across, and it's so interesting to me when different individuals that I will follow, and I'm interested in hearing what they have to say, and then they'll end up, now that I'm, been studying that for 20 plus years, and it's really been more the last 5 years that I've really maybe finally sunk in and grasped. It's probably been 25 to 30 years or 25 years for sure, that I've been trying to understand the hero's journey, Campbell's work with that, but it's probably been the last 5 years that I've really started integrating it into my life and really seeing it, and then being able to teach it to others, either in a class or in whatever format it is. And then when I run across other people, then I'm hearing them say the same thing, but they're just using different language. Right? Richard Rohr talks about it being order, disorder, and then reorder. Yeah. And it's the same circle, right? It's the same process. When you think about because after the Fatherhood Project finished, I remember and then you also made the decision to not go for season 2.
Yeah.
And you and Sarah had the opportunity to move to a house that was in the woods.
Yeah.
And that was a completely different experience. It's something that you hadn't lived in this particular type of setting before. And that was in that maybe that was a dark night of the soul time period in that disorder piece. What do you remember as you were at that time period? It was after the Fatherhood Project was done. You were wrestling with what's going to be the next. You had your own company at that time. Tell us a little bit about the place where you live. Tell us about that, and then that season that you were there. But then also, what were some things that you learned about yourself there?
Yeah. So you probably don't even know we moved.
Oh yeah, no, I remember.
Oh, okay.
Because it was a year ago that all fell. I mean, it didn't work out the way you thought you wanted it to.
Yeah.
And it ends up probably being better than it's supposed to be.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So I would say up until about a month ago, if I'm just being completely transparent, like I didn't know what and the Fatherhood Project was such a huge line in the sand and whatever, mountaintop, whatever you want to call it. And and up until about a month ago, I really wouldn't be able to articulate what that time period was. And I'm still processing what it was, because after all of that, some time passed, and like I said before, the phone stopped ringing, and the phone, it was either some of my local clients thought, oh, well, now he's successful, we can't afford him, which was like, no, like, I didn't make any money on that. That's what people don't understand is we got paid to make the show, but there was nothing left over for us, and so I was still doing the corporate stuff during the day and that at night. And then the time in between was really, I think, was like this time of me needing to go literally into the woods and metaphorically into the woods. Sure. Because we bought we had an opportunity to get some property. And it was like 10 acres, and it was amazing. It looked fantastic on Instagram, but it was both killing us physically and financially. probably 8 of those acres were wooded, and so I was like a part-time lumberjack. But and all the while, like internally for me, I was entering like a real dark place. I'm just by default, I deal with depression and anxiety pretty intensely. And so during that time period, I was really trying to find my way and figure out what was going to be next. I knew that it wasn't just making videos about ice cream machines, because that's pretty unfulfilling. But I also didn't think it would be something like I did with the Fatherhood Project, because that was also pretty unfulfilling. It looked great on paper, but it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And so that time in between was me trying to figure out what that looks like next. And I think with about a month ago, I literally kind of had driven myself crazy about wanting to make my own content, but I just didn't know what it would look like. I still don't know what it looks like, but something, I don't even know what, but something just snapped, and I was like, fuck it, like, it's time to just start, and I'm going to go ahead and document that process. And by doing that and stepping in front of the camera and making some videos on YouTube, it's kind of way more for me than it is for anybody else, because it's forcing me to look in the mirror and figure out what it is that I want and figure out what I want to be. And then the nice little byproduct of that is there's a few people that are watching and they're going, man, me too, like I want to start something, I want to do something. And the response has been huge, and it's like, there it is. Like my role with that is to help myself first, because there's something about putting yourself out there and talking and asking questions that you learn about yourself. And then also I'm noticing that, man, it's going to help people, and my wife and I by default want to help people, almost to a fault. Where we want people to know that it's okay, like it's okay to struggle, it's okay to be a weirdo, it's okay to just be yourself, and I'm really, really, really happy with the response that I'm getting so far. But it's really hard. I don't want anybody to think that creating content is easy or doing anything on your own is easy. It's not. And in hindsight, I think what happened to me is that everything kind of came to me easily. I got into graphic design, and it just kind of worked. I got into filmmaking, and it just kind of worked. I worked hard at it, but not that hard. And the Fatherhood Project was it landed in my lap. I didn't do anything extraordinary to get that. It just landed in my lap. And what I'm learning is that anything that's good and that's going to last is going to involve a shit ton of hard work, and it involves that hero's journey of going to the dark night of the soul and really figuring out who you are, and facing your freaking Darth Vader in the cave during Empire Strikes Back, and then coming out and putting yourself out there and learning from that, and then moving forward. And what's interesting is that the more honest I am with the content, and the more authentic, and just putting out the struggles, the better response I get. If that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. And speaking of that, when that time period that you were, the time period when you were literally and metaphorically in the woods, right? And it was in between, right? You were in between the Fatherhood Project. You had started. Why am I drawing a blank? What was the name of your company?
Frank and Harvey.
I had the Harvey part. I couldn't remember the Frank part. So Frank and Harvey was your company, and you had tried a handful of different things. You had rented some space, and then you brought the studio out to the piece of property you had there in the woods, and things were shifting, right? Things were just shifting at that time period. You talked about one of the things that you learned was that you had to be true to yourself. I remember one time you telling me how you were utilizing exercise to help with not only the depression, but helping with the creativity. There was a road that you had in front of your house. Tell us a little bit about how you used exercise, either literally chopping wood or running or whatever. How do you?
Yeah. So my joke is always like, I'm going to be healthy, but I'm not going to be a dick about it.
Yeah.
So I have found for depression, like I've done all the medication, I've done all the meditation, everything. Yeah. But the one thing, at least for me, that works better than anything is exercise. Okay. And that involves a little bit of running. And now, in addition to that, I've added to the mix like a sauna. Okay. Like it's just when shit is off the rails and I'm just like not in a good place, my wife will be like, I think you should probably go sit in the sauna for a little bit. I wish I owned a sauna, but so I go to the Y and just sweat it out. But I had been ignoring, my health for years, and I was, during the Fatherhood Project and after the Fatherhood Project, it was like my drinking went up, my health went down, and I was pounding, 6-7 beers a night, and if you look at the clip of me on the Today Show, like I just look swollen, like that beer, swelling. And I was like, I got to do something about this because I just didn't feel right, and I was going to a real dark place. And all the podcasts and all the books all say exercise is the key, but I just sort of ignored it. And so I just was like, that's it. I'm gonna quit smoking. I'm gonna cut back on the drinking, and I'm going to start running. And I was like, I'm going to run a half mile. I'm going to run a mile. And dear Lord, it was hard. And there was this hill right in front of my house. that became like this metaphor for my life, that it was like, if I don't, I gotta make it up this hill. I gotta, like, because I couldn't at first. Like, I would have to walk the hill. And so I'd run down the hill to the stop sign, and then back to my house was like a mile, and then up that hill on the way back was just pure hell. And it was like not only pure hell physically, but it was like mentally, like, how did I get here? I can't even make it up this hill, because I went to school on a scholarship for soccer, and so I was an athlete my whole life, and to wake up and not be able to even run up a hill was just a big punch to the face, right, to my ego. But then that hill was just like, all right, I'm gonna make it, and I would run once a week, you know, but I'd run, then I started going twice a week, and then I started doing 3 times a week. And I know I joke about I'm going to be healthy but not be a dick about it. What I mean by that is, like, I was going to be healthy, but I'm not going to be a dick to myself about it. Because whenever I would try to start something and then I would fail, because you're gonna fail. If you start anything, you're gonna fail. And it's like, what I think why we stop doing it is because then you're like, well, I can't run a 10-minute mile anymore, you know, and it's like, well, stop, like, run a 16-minute mile,
right?
Walk a 16-minute mile. It's better than not doing it at all,
right?
You know, but I have just found that in that time period in my life sort of made me recognize that is a key essential to me being healthy. And I'm terrible about it. If I get in once a week, I'm like thrilled. If I get in twice a week, then awesome. You know, I don't have that, you know, like, well, guys like you, like with a bodybuilding background, you just, you know, every day, I just don't have that. And so I stopped judging myself about that. And then it's like I chalk up the victories to, if I get out there twice a week, it is awesome. And I see results because of that. So it's like, it's better than nothing, you know, because nothing got me in some real dark places. You know?
And I think that, you know, a couple weeks ago, I had the good fortune during the Suicide Awareness Month, and Kevin Hines, he's a mental health advocate now. 20 years ago, when he was 19, he had jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge in an attempt to die from suicide, and he was one of there's like 4,000 plus people they've identified that have jumped. Only 32 have survived. Jeez. And he was one of the 32. Anyways, what he learned in that experience, because it's a crazy situation. I mean, it's like 250 feet or whatever from the platform to the water. Yeah. And you go to like 70 miles an hour, and it's like 4.5 seconds, which is a long time to know what's going to happen. Yeah. Right. I mean, and you know, we were talking earlier with Dalton about wrestling. You know, you're in a bad position for 4.5 seconds. It's a long time.
Yeah. It's a lifetime.
And but he was interviewed, and the other 31 individuals were interviewed afterwards, and they all said the same thing. They wish they wouldn't have jumped. They wanted to live, and even though he did live, and he had surgery on his back and all these different things, he doesn't want to die. But because of his mental illness, he has bipolar 1, and because of his mental illness, he has struggled. He's been, I think, inpatient 8 times in the last 20 years because of the suicidal thoughts, because of the hallucinations, the voices. And so just recently when I saw him, I said, Kevin, you look phenomenal, because I've been following him for a while. I go, you look great. You've lost weight. You look great. And he's lost some 30, something like that, some, you know, decent amount of weight. And he talked about that he works out for something like 35 minutes twice a day. He makes sure that he gets 7 to 9 hours of sleep every day. He eats certain foods and avoids other types of foods. For him, the medication's one portion of it. Doing therapy is another part of it. Yeah. But it's the lifestyle. It's about incorporating, for him, because his system is so fragile, is that his workouts are essential, his eating is essential, his sleep is essential. The fact that he continually says he's feeding his mind regarding information about not only bipolar but about mental health overall. And so I remember, you know, I remembered when you had told me that had had been a critical part, that when you were in a dark place, either going to the sauna, going for a run, going out and, all right, I'm going to take care of that tree that, that fell.
Yeah.
It was more for your mental health than it was to clean the tree up, right? I mean, it wasn't,
Absolutely.
And so I just remember that you telling me those stories, and I just want you to kind of expand a little bit about that. And
I think that I think there's kind of two things that I've learned during that process is like I've always felt bad or guilty, or like I've always had this idea that I can fix it. I will always fix things before having someone else do it. My wife's window this past week just dropped into the
in the car?
Into the door, right?
Yeah.
I was like, I can figure this out, and I'm taking the door apart, and that's just my nature, right?
Sure.
And so with depression and anxiety, I've always been like, I can fix this. And it wasn't until I realized, like, wait, I think it's just there. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. But no matter what I do, it's just usually, it's there. So it was like, okay, through therapy, and through, way too much time researching it, I figured out that, like, okay, well, this thing wants certain things. So depression wants me to stay in bed. Depression wants me to feel bad for myself. Depression wants me to wallow. And I was talking to my friend, this friend of mine, Josh, who's a therapist in Tennessee, and we were on the phone, and he was like, yeah, depression wants that from you. And I was like, that's genius, right? Yep. Depression wants me to just give up and latch onto those thoughts. And it's like, wait a minute, I don't really want that. It's way easier to do that. It's way easier to feel sorry for yourself, but I don't really want that.
Right.
And so for me, the exercise, getting out in nature, and even making things for me is a key part of just, in a sense, living with it, but then also embracing it and saying, you know what, the reason my stuff is so good, and the reason I'm good at asking questions and making things, is probably because I have this friend of depression with me, because it means that I'm, I have empathy. I understand what it's like to have that dark night of the soul. And so maybe instead of seeing it as something that I got to get rid of and I got to fix, how do I deal with this? How do I put it at bay? How do I just not give it what it wants? Now, disclaimer, I'm not a doctor and or a therapist, so that could be all wrong. But for me, that's just been, part of the process is kind of figuring out, how do I do this, and how do I mute that voice in my head that wants to go to bed and wants to watch Netflix and wants to, all of those things are from myself being lazy and not going towards things that I actually want. And so any of that time in nature or that time in exercise is my way of saying fuck you to that.
Right.
And that's been huge. And I still, like, the last week the last couple weeks, I'm like in Atlanta for work, and I'm going to be in Iowa tomorrow, and it's just like, I don't even know when I'm going to fit it in, but I know that when I land in at the hotel tomorrow, like, I'm going to take, even if it's 10 minutes, I better get on that treadmill, because otherwise, I'm going to have a rough trip,
right?
And that kind of stuff too, though, like, it helps also, like, just have energy. Weirdly, like, if I want to do all these things, I can't be sitting around having a 6-pack of beer,
right?
I need to get on the treadmill, get in the sauna, sweat the demons out, and then get at it,
right? It's, I know for me, it has become part of the formula for me to be available to, either if it's giving a presentation, if it's at work when I'm counseling someone, it's part of the preparation for me to be available. That I have to. There's a physical part of it. There's a spiritual component to it. There's a mental component. But if I don't prepare myself physically, then I'm going to probably struggle or be distracted spiritually. If I'm not doing physical and spiritual, then then mentally I'm not able, and emotionally I'm not going to be able to do be available, right? Because I'm distracted, and so
I think too, it's like the concept, I don't know who said it, but the concept of the monkey mind, you've got this monkey in your brain that's just like jumping all over the place and trying to distract you, and it's like, for me, exercise and all that helps me kind of mute that a little bit and put it at bay and recognize it for what it is.
When your friend Josh was talking about depression, I was reminded of a story, metaphor of this. We each have two wolves, a good wolf and a dark wolf that lies within us, right? One is about life-taking, and it's about taking things, and it's about, maybe that's the depression. Then we have the life-giving wolf that is about hope and possibility and creativity and growth. Both are there. You get to choose who you're going to feed. You get to choose which one of the wolves are you going to feed. And I had not necessarily thought of it the same way that how Josh said it, and then how you took that information. But I talk about depression lies to us because that's part of its job. But also, depression's going to be fed by what we give it, or it's going to be contained by what we don't feed it. And so I think that's a great example.
And what sucks about it is, like, depression's way easier to feed.
Oh, yeah. A lot easier.
It's so much easier. The other, whatever, is so much harder. Like, I hate running on a treadmill. I feel like a hamster trapped in a cage and looking around. I hate it.
It's uncomfortable.
Oh, it's so uncomfortable. It doesn't even matter what kind of music I put on. It just is like, ugh. I would much rather sit around and drink a beer. It's just way easier.
Much easier. But it's about that choice. It's not that one's good or one's bad. It's just, where do you want to be? And which one is going to help you get to where you want to be? So you had mentioned something earlier, and again, it was one of those things that you actually introduced me to, and it's probably one of the books that I give out and refer to people. It's got to be the one I refer most to everybody, and that's Ryan Holiday's work in The Obstacle is the Way.
Oh, nice.
And then I
thought you were going to mention the interpretive dance book I gave you.
That one.
Interpretive dance passion. You haven't talked about that on the podcast?
No, I had not talked about that one. Well,
now's a good time.
We're still working on it.
Okay. I'll let you borrow my tights.
Or any form of dance, period. Is still, we've just celebrated my daughter's 21st birthday, and that was probably an embarrassing, watching me and a couple other people on the dance floor dancing up in Milwaukee with
I need footage of this.
Thank goodness, as far as I know, there is none.
I'm sure there is somewhere.
I imagine there is. So when you, what was it about Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way? What about that concept? What spoke to you about that?
So Ryan Holiday, I actually came across him because he was the marketing director at American Apparel, which is like this super cool t-shirt company, right? And he was like the marketing director for this huge company, and he was 21. And I read an article about him that he had a really limited budget with American Apparel, and he needed to figure out how to do a national campaign on like a local budget. And so he took out a billboard in LA, and then he secretly called a bunch of his friends and had them go vandalize the billboard. And then he had all these other email accounts set up, and he sent out emails to all the papers about their billboard being vandalized, and then it got picked up on CNN, and so they got this national exposure. And it was something like, he did the math, it was like $20 million worth of advertising for $1,500,
Okay.
And he had this whole book called Trust Me, I'm Lying, and it was all about sort of the underbelly of marketing. And I loved that book. And then kind of out of left field, so he wrote all about marketing, and so that's kind of how I came across him. And then out of left field, he wrote this book, Obstacle is the Way, which was really about the philosophy of stoicism and this idea in our life that every obstacle that is in our life, you can look at it one of two ways. Number one, you can look at it as an obstacle or a wall, and you can sit there and pout about it. Or number two, you can look at it as a wall or an obstacle and say, how is this wall or this obstacle, first of all, how am I going to get around it or over it or through it? And then once I'm through it, once I'm around it, what did I learn from that? Mm-hmm. Because most likely there's going to be another obstacle in my life that's gonna I'm gonna need those things I learned from the other one.
Sure.
You know, so in my life, what did you learn from the Fatherhood Project? What did you learn, and how is that going to help you moving forward?
Yeah.
You know, so and yeah, that book, I read that probably once a year. Mm-hmm. And then Ego is the Enemy is his other book. And then I think this week he's coming out with one called Stillness, which I'm assuming is about meditation. And, you know, I'm sure it's going to be great.
Sure. Yeah.
But Obstacle is the Way is just, it's such an easy read, and it's such like, I tell people all the time, if you want to kind of dive into philosophical thought, that's a great place to start, because it's really accessible, mm-hmm. and it's really understandable, and it's a great book.
Yeah, like I said, I've enjoyed it. The concept of it. Mm-hmm. I think one of the two things that really, for me, that resonated with was beginning to introduce the idea that just because there's an obstacle doesn't mean it's the wrong path, mm-hmm. And obstacles are part of the journey, right? Mm-hmm. It's just, and that aspect of it was probably the most liberating for me, was just this idea that, and I don't know where I ever came up with this idea that if you're on the right path, it somehow is obstacle free. I don't know exactly where that came from, mm-hmm. but I do know that I fell into that trance, mm-hmm. of thinking that if it was obstacle free, somehow it was the right path,
right.
Or if there was obstacles on the path, that was somehow the wrong path.
Yeah.
And then I struggle with maybe even committing to being on that path, because I'm not wanting to make a mistake. And so that was one of the things that I really liked about that book. And then the other part of it, and I've shared this many times before, is that the story that you're going to tell at a given point in the future is the story that you're writing now.
Yeah.
And that helped me not get stuck in the funk, because I don't want to be talking about the story that Kevin was stuck in the funk for more than I needed to be.
Yeah, and I think the obstacle is also this idea of being here now.
Yeah.
Meaning, instead of always looking what's over the wall, what's behind the wall, what's on the side of the wall, like, let's look at the wall, and be in this moment right this second.
Yeah.
And I think my tendency is always to look forward or look behind, and so how are you looking at right this second?
Right.
Yesterday we were at it'd be my father-in-law's mother. She died, and we were at a funeral, and so we were driving into the cemetery, and it was raining, and then I told my wife and kids, I was like, man, if I was making a movie, this is how it would be. She lived a wonderful life. She was 97, 98 years old.
Okay, sure.
And I told the kids, I was like, we're all gonna die. And they were all like, geez, Dad, this is pretty dark. I was like, no, but so we got to live for right now.
Right.
Because this is what we all have in common, so let's not waste today.
Right.
And let's not worry about tomorrow. Let's live today, because we just don't know when that's going to happen, or it is going to happen. So let's accept that and be stoic about it, and have fun, dance with your daughter, and make a fool of yourself, and go to that party and party, and go be with your friends and be with your friends, and that's what I love about the philosophy of Stoicism, and that's what I love most about Obstacles the Way, is this overarching thing of be in the now, and that's one of the hardest things that I think any one of us can try to accomplish and or accomplish. But I've had moments of it, and it's very possible, and when I'm really intentional about it, I I feel really great, you know, because depression wants me to not engage at the party. Depression wants me to go to the father-daughter dance with my daughter and stand on the wall and scroll through my Facebook while she's out there dancing.
Right.
But it's like, instead, stoicism says, get out there and dance and make a fool out of yourself. Get sweaty, have fun, because it's going to not only make your daughter's night, but those moments are fleeting, because pretty soon she's going to not want to have anything to do with me.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
Or she'll be sharing her time with, you know, a partner, sharing her time with creating her own life, and it'll be at another stage. And even if she wants to be with you, she'll have other things pulling at her time.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up today, I want you to just mention this new project, this new platform in which you're creating content.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about that.
So I'll be quite honest with you. I have no idea where it's going.
Okay.
But on YouTube, I've just been making videos about the process of figuring out what's next. I have this idea, and I've had it for a long time, and it's called Makers and Misfits.
Okay.
And the idea is that I want to talk to people who make, and I want to talk to people who are misfits.
Sure.
The misfits, to me, are all of my friends growing up.
Right.
It's the lawyer by day, punk rock cover band singer by night. You know, I want to find out what makes them tick, what inspires them, but then as well, talk to those people and let people know that it's okay to feel like a weirdo. It's okay to feel depressed. It's okay to have a bad day, and it's okay to have obstacles, if you will. And I'm hoping to just make some really authentic, transparent content, and I'm about a month in, and it's doing quite well by my standards. And more importantly, though, I told my wife the other night, I was like, holy shit, this is the first time in my whole career that I'm actually making something just for myself. And some would argue, well, the Fatherhood Project was that. And I'd say, well, yeah, but I wasn't making it for myself. I was making it for the 7 producers at Soul Pancake, and they're wonderful people, and we still message each other, one of them, but it wasn't for me. It was for Dove Man Care, because they were paying for it. Right. And so now what's so awesome about the platforms that we have is I can do whatever I want. And it's been a real freeing experience to make whatever I want and not have to pander to some audience, or, you know, worry about some person not being offended or whatever. And not that I'm offensive, but it's really cool to see how much people want authentic content. And so we're going to see where it goes. And so what I've done is I've decided, okay, Wednesday nights, because I'm super busy, I'm taking Wednesday nights, and that's when I'm going to work on it. And so having that bucket of time has been awesome, because it's like, well, I'll just do that on Wednesday. I'll do that on Wednesday. Now it's starting to bleed into other nights of the week, but it's been really deeply satisfying to just be able to create and make for the sake of making. And so wherever it goes, I don't know, but I do know the overall thing is like, I'm going to make for the sake of making.
And I think that's, you know, and I've watched each one of them. You know, the last one I saw was you and Sarah on there. And so I've enjoyed them. I you know, it is exactly what you just said. It's an opportunity for people to get to know you more, get to, you know, you're very authentic and transparent about where you're at as you're making it, but then you also, you know, your ability to create film, and there's other things that you're adding to it as well. So there's that creative process, you know, as it goes into it too. So looking forward to seeing more. If people do want to see more of that work, How do they
just go on YouTube and look up Corbyn Tyson. It's Corbyn.
Okay.
Tyson, Tyson, just like the chicken.
There you go.
That's the best way to find me on Instagram, Facebook, all
the chicken Tyson. No.
Yeah, all of the social medias are what I say to my son to drive him nuts on Snap, Twitter.
Yes. So, just to have him correct you again, right? Perfect.
Yeah.
So anything you would want to finish off with as we wrap up today for anybody out there listening?
No, this is great. Like I think what's so awesome about this and platforms like this is that anybody can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
You can get out there. It takes a lot of hard work, but there's something about being able to talk about what's going on in your life, and even if it's pretty ordinary, like the stuff I'm doing is pretty ordinary, but it's like there's extraordinary things within that ordinary. I'm blessed to be able to have like a filmmaking background, so like some of the stuff just comes easier to me, but I don't let that stop you, because those obstacles that you're going to have to overcome, you're going to learn more about yourself. And so I'm always like telling people, get out there and do something. And if nothing else, like a podcast like this is a great excuse for you and I to connect, because we're both really busy and I haven't seen you in forever, and it's just awesome. And now forever and ever we'll have this.
Exactly.
So when we're old dudes, we can go, remember that time? And we can literally watch it.
Exactly.
And I think that's going to be awesome for us. I think that's awesome for my kids. Yeah. And so it's like, instead of just sitting and consuming, like I'm like telling everyone, contribute.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you just said is exactly why we do this, right? I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but I do know that people have stories of want to capture and talk about the hero's journey, talk about the obstacles that are in people's life, but most importantly, what did they learn from those things? Because if there's one thing that we talked about that can help one person, then it was worth spending an hour doing it, right?
Yeah.
And if it happens to happen too, then we're in bonus territory.
Yeah, so. And the mantra I've been playing in my head is Elizabeth Gilbert says that creativity is the engine of resilience.
Absolutely.
And so whether it's painting a picture or taking a picture or building a house, I mean, whatever that looks like, I think that creativity is saying, not today, depression.
Yeah, we're not going to feed you today. I'm working on creating something. Yeah, and I think you're right. The opposite of that depression, of that darkness that happens, is about feeding that light, creativity, growth. If it's working out, whatever it is, movement, whatever it may be, and we have that choice. Doesn't mean it's easy to make the choice, but we do have that choice. So, Corbyn, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for sharing. I look forward to hearing more, and of course, having that genius that you live with, Sarah. That's just a whole nother thing.
That's a whole nother podcast. You need to just have her come out.
Exactly. So, well, again, thank you for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing the stuff you have, and then sometime we'll have to capture this again. If nothing else, it'll be an opportunity for you and I to talk for an hour.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us. Definitely check out Corbyn Tyson on either YouTube or different social media platforms. He's got some phenomenal content out there, and I really encourage you to do that. Thank you very much for being here with me today, and I look forward to being with you next week.